Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and those of you watching online as well. Good morning, good evening, good day, wherever you are on the planet watching these proceedings. My name is Gordon Flake, and I'm the CEO of the Perth US Asia Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you all both in person, which is particularly delightful, and online to the 5th annual Japan Symposium, this year focusing on a new era in Australia-Japan security relations. Before we formally begin the proceedings, it is my great honor to ask Ms. Ingrid Cummings, a Whadjuk Noongar woman from Fremantle, is a graduate of Murdoch University with a degree from Melbourne Business School, who is now currently working in community relations head for the city of Canning, to offer a formal welcome to country for this beautiful venue we're at here at the University of Western Australia on the traditional lands of the Noongar Whadjuk people. Ingrid.
Kaya mama nyoga yakuling ni jamaya maya ngai Ingrid Cummings ngai Whadjuk Noongar yo yakuling corporate wearing jening yiranga nuna wa jenjeng ko ni ja corporate bujawa. Pretty good, eh? On behalf of my ancestors and elders past, present, to the emerging leadership of the Whadjuk Noongar region, may I please acknowledge them and thank you all for having me here representing about 38,000 Noongar people across this region to do the very significant ceremony of Wanju Buja, or Welcome to Country. Here at this very place where we're meeting today is right next to a place called Brotandalup. And Brotandalup is the place of pelicans, but it's also known as a place where hearts come together, where a lot of marriage ceremonies or people from different regions coming together. What an incredible and amazing place for you to have your gathering here today. So I certainly hope that you pick up on that energy of this is the place where hearts from many lands come together to do good things. So my welcomes are interactive. No one's a spectator. Right? You get to join in because my ancestors believe that it doesn't matter where you're from, what colour of skin that you have, even if you're an Eagles supporter. We will still love you. What a great weekend. I mean, 2, right? 2 wins for the Dockers on the weekend. Fantastic. So we believe in good head, heart and spirit. We believe everybody should have the opportunity to connect to country. And I'm going to give you that opportunity by Ma Baraning Ma. Has anyone done that before? Anyone Ma Baraning Ma'd? No? What if I said to clap your hands? Has anyone clapped their hands before? Definitely a lot if you're a Docker supporter on the weekend. So I'll get you to clap along the beat and I'll sing a very special song that comes from a place called Kalamarda here in Perth. Kala meaning the fire and Marda meaning place of ceremony. So when you're living in the southwest or visit the beautiful southwest of Western Australia, you actually speak a lot of Noongar a lot. So if I say Kalamarda in an Aussie accent, Kalamunda, yeah? Which is a suburb here in Perth. So this is where the song comes from. I'll get you to clap along with me. I'm going to sing for the ancestors to come and to look over all of us here to give us good blessing and good energy for us to go forward to have a wonderful gathering here today. And $50 to anyone who can translate. Are you ready? Noongar got talent, right? And so do you. Like I said, we don't discriminate. I hope you felt that wonderful energy because when we do Welcome to Country, it truly is an opportunity to make you feel a sense of connection like we do here in this beautiful place, remembering it's going to take all of us to go forward together to achieve what we want to achieve in the future. So Wanjunitja Noongar Buja, welcome to beautiful Whadjuk Noongar country on behalf of our families and our ancestors, and I hope you have a wonderful gathering here with each other today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. we don't necessarily always associate policy conferences with energy and welcoming, but if we could have half the energy and half that spirit of welcome that Ingrid shared with us today, I think we'll have a very successful conversation. As I mentioned, this is the 5th Japan Symposium. This year, the title is Focused on a New Era in Australia-Japan Security Cooperation. It is something we've done in partnership with the consulate. I recognize the Consul General Suzuki here today. And this year, it was kind of a hybrid event. As I mentioned, we've got 100 people in the room, and it is so good to see your faces in person. But we've also got over 150 people watching online. So we welcome those of you who weren't able to be with us in person and joining us for this important discussion. But this is actually just the tail end of what has been a 3-week process. My colleague Haley Channer is our Senior Policy Fellow in Canberra. We call her our Canbassador. Haley flew out here for this event, and over the last 2 weeks has moderated or worked with us together to do 2 different sessions, a deep dive look at Australia-Japan security cooperation in this region. And obviously, a lot of attention has been focused on submarines, has been focused on AUKUS, that's been focused on the Quad. But as I think you'll hear today, there has been some tremendous advancement in security cooperation between these very important countries, Australia and Japan. We're honored to have with us today Major General Natasha Fox. We'll be talking later on in the program. In some respects, we are recognizing and celebrating the advancement of the Reciprocal Access Agreement between Australia and Japan, and a military agreement. I see former Ambassador Richard Court here. He was instrumental in the early stages of that, negotiating it in Canberra. I should also recognize former Defense Minister, former Foreign Minister, and a member of our board, Stephen Smith. Delighted to have Stephen with us as well. And of course, our special guest from Canberra, Ambassador Yamagami, the keynote speaker kicking us off. And in just a minute, virtually, we'll be joined by Ambassador Jan Adams, who's calling in from Tokyo. Not quite yet able to entice her down from Tokyo. We're too close in terms of the borders, but we'll be able to get perspectives from both of our nation's capitals here in Perth, as you might imagine. I should also acknowledge that we have Kate O'Shaughnessy here, is the Australian ambassador to Mauritius. So I'm not quite sure what the plural is for a bevy of ambassadors, but we certainly got that in the room today and online. Delighted to have it. And we've also got a number of other key supporters. I look out the room, I probably should be mentioning each and every one of you in person, but let me acknowledge our very important corporate partners, INPEX. We're delighted to have Bill Townsend and your other colleague from INPEX here with us. I should acknowledge the state government, Simone Spencer, Deputy Director General of the Department of Jobs, Tourism, Science, Innovation. JITSI is a very important partner of ours going forward. We've got Patty Gregg from Austell, and very much appreciate their support. And given the importance of this relationship, it is always important to recognize how fortunate we are to have such a vibrant Japanese business community in Western Australia, which largely built our resource sector and maintains it. And if you look into the future, you know, we've recently from this stage have done programs on hydrogen and critical materials. They really are the future as well as the past in terms of our state economy. So to see Moroi-san and to see Nakao-san here with us from Mitsui and Mitsubishi, we're greatly honored to have you with us. I've probably gone on too long in terms of the introductions, but this is a really great opportunity for us as a community, whether you're in academia, whether you're in state government, whether you're in the business community, to reflect on Australia-Japan security relations. Now, normally, in this venue, we wouldn't talk about security. That would be a Canberra thing, right? Here, we would just talk about energy and mining, right? But if you've noticed over the last 10 years, that has changed dramatically. Not only do we have Australia's largest shipbuilder, and probably one of the most important ones, the only shipbuilder outside of the United States that actually builds for the United States Navy in Austell, but we also have a defense industry in WA that is growing in importance. And on top of that, the recent developments more broadly in the Quad and in AUKUS only highlight the growing importance of Western Australia. And so for us to be able to have a conversation with leaders from Japan about that burgeoning relationship, I think is very appropriately centered here in Australia's Indian Ocean capital as we think about the future trends in this region. We're going to kick off our program to make sure, and I want to make sure that we've got the video hookup right. We're good for the video hookup. With a virtual beam in from Ambassador Jan Adams, who's AO PSM. She's Australia's ambassador in Canberra. I'm sorry, in Tokyo right now. Ambassador Adams has kindly spoken here in Perth to us before, but we're really delighted to have her here with us virtually. She was previously Australia's ambassador to the People's Republic of China, so she's kind of seen both sides of many of the issues that we're working on today. Prior to that, had served in a long career as a senior member of our diplomatic corps in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade as the Deputy Secretary over trade negotiations. Many of you will know that my colleague Jeff Wilson, who's our Director of Research, is a real tradie. And if you had trading cards, like baseball cards for trade negotiators, there would be one for Jan Adams. And so Jeff, I'm sure, would have that in his collection as well in terms of the process. So without further ado, allow me to turn over virtually the podium to Ambassador Jan Adams for her welcoming remarks. Ambassador Adams.
Gordon, thanks very much for such a generous introduction. And Ingrid, thank you so much for your most engaging welcome to country. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to say thank you very much for having me and greet the many distinguished speakers and participants. Let me particularly recognise a few people, Ambassador Yamagami Shingo, Ambassador of Japan to Australia, Major General Natasha Fox, Deputy Chief of Army, Richard Court, my distinguished predecessor as ambassador here, and former Foreign Minister Stephen Smith. But good morning, everybody. The Perth US Asia Centre's Japan Symposium has become an important fixture looking at strategic and economic trends and how Japan and Australia can pursue our shared interests in the region. I look forward to what I'm sure will be a stimulating discussion this morning. It really is hard to imagine a time in history when the need for Australia-Japan security cooperation was more pressing. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has violated international law and the UN Charter. The principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity are at stake. China-Russia cooperation is at an unprecedented high. Their no limits partnership has very important implications for us all. China's military expansion continues rapidly. Its persistent militarization of the South China Sea is destabilizing and could provoke escalation. North Korea's missile tests and pursuit of weapons of mass destruction violate UNSC resolutions and pose a grave risk to international peace and security. So against this backdrop, the significant advances in Australian-Japan bilateral defence and security relations are extremely important and very necessary. The significance of Prime Ministers Morrison and Kishida signing the Reciprocal Access Agreement in January is hard to overstate. As Prime Minister Morrison has said, the treaty is a statement of our two nations' commitment to work together in meeting the shared strategic challenges we face and to contribute to a secure and stable Indo-Pacific. The RAA will underpin greater and more complex practical engagement between the ADF and the Japanese Self-Defence Forces. And I'm sure we're going to see much more advanced defence and security cooperation under that framework. So the priority now is for ratification of this important treaty. It's currently with Australia's Joint Standing Committee on Treaties to commence our domestic process. And we want to see both countries ratify this year. Australia and Japan's response to the volcanic eruption in Tonga showed already the closeness that we already have in Australia-Japan defence relationship and our increasing ability to easily operate together. It actually also demonstrated the benefits of the RAA, even though it's not yet ratified, as Australia arranged for Japan's Self-Defence Force to base itself in Queensland as seamlessly as possible. And, you know, only between Australia and Japan could it have happened in less than 3 days. While signing the RAA, our Prime Ministers also agreed to articulate our shared vision and ambition for our special strategic partnership in a new joint declaration on security cooperation. Now, work has already begun on this revised declaration. We think it really is a major imperative to update that founding document last agreed in 2007. Now, it's clear that there are major developments in policy taking place in Japan and in Australia, opportunities, in fact, that will need to be taken into account when we set out our bilateral vision in the declaration. We know the Quad, the importance of our trilateral defence cooperation with the United States, and indeed our partnerships with Southeast Asia and ASEAN centrality will be vital to realising our bilateral vision. Australia also brings to the table our AUKUS defence partnership with the UK and the US, our investment in nuclear-powered submarines and infrastructure, and investments in cyber, space, science and technology, and increases in troop numbers. Meanwhile, in Japan, we're also seeing shifts day by day, and in fact, it's headlined in today's, you can't see it, but even in today's Japan Times, changes before our eyes in security posture. I'd like to personally, and on behalf of the Australian government, commend Prime Minister Kishida and his cabinet for the speed with which they've responded to the needs of the Ukrainian armed force to provide non-lethal military equipment. We're also seeing Japan acting quickly and effectively on sanctions and export controls in response to Russia's aggression. Again, commend Prime Minister Kishida's leadership on this. Prime Minister Kishida has spoken about fundamentally strengthening defence and deterrence capabilities and I quote, considering all possible options, including enemy base strike capabilities. Now, this strike capability is something which even very recently seemed a remote possibility, but now is actively under discussion. All of this comes in the context of Japan's work to update its national security strategy, defence policy guidelines and midterm defence plan. And now these foundational documents, the review of these policies has been brought forward in recognition of the deteriorating strategic environment. Now, it really is a chance for Japan to align more closely with US strategies and capabilities. But given the trajectory of Australia and Japan's defence commitments, the relationship with Australia may well also need to be significantly elevated in Japan's pillars of cooperation in its defence policy documents. Another area of emerging cooperation concerns economic security. There have always been important economic dimensions to national security. Of course, globalisation and economic integration have only highlighted the friction points of where economics and national security intersect. Over decades, countries like Australia and Japan have benefited enormously from the opening of the global economy. Without it, we would all literally be much the poorer. But increased openness also means increasingly being exposed to external economic impacts and threats. And of course, the larger the economic partner, the larger the potential exposure. China's economic coercion over the last 2 years being a case in point, as our exports of wine, barley, beef, lobster, coal, among some other products have effectively been throttled. Now, these actions by China really serve to highlight the vital importance of our special strategic partnership with Japan, where we're so like-minded on so many international economic issues. The risks of economic coercion and economic vulnerabilities today are real, potentially harmful, and I'm afraid not going away in the immediate term. So to address this, we're working with Japan and like-mindeds across a number of ways. We strengthen supply chains, use the institutions that we have, be that OECD, WTO or elsewhere, to highlight bad behaviour and discipline where possible. We're working together, as always, to craft better economic rules and norms through various of the regional institutions. And we will continue to provide options for diversification to mitigate against those acting in bad faith. Building and upholding this international economic architecture, of course, strengthens our collective economic security. It also builds on the 1957 Australia-Japan Commerce Agreement. At that time, what a powerful gesture of reconciliation and a visionary recognition of the two countries' deep economic complementarity. I know that with Western Australia and some of our key Japanese investors there, I just note the long-term purchase contracts from the 1960s that were so foundational, as was mentioned in the introduction before, in generating resource industries in Japan and economic security. Industries in Australia and economic security in Japan. This trust that comes from that time continues to grow. I see it, also as a week-by-week proposition as we look at the new energy and resources partnerships that actually are already emerging in hydrogen, ammonia, and a range of other critical minerals and materials that will be so crucial for the climate, renewable energy technologies, and digital infrastructure for our future. In conclusion, I want to leave you with just a few simple thoughts about the opportunities for security relations between Australia and Japan. The future and trajectory of our cooperation really now is embedded in the changing regional context, in the imperative of economic security and the enduring fundamental partnership of our energy security, and including as we move to decarbonising our economies. So what better partnership than ours to pursue these interests, given the trust embedded in our relationships and our complementary economies. It truly is a remarkable, special strategic partnership. And I thank everybody there today for their interest and their contribution, and I look forward to the discussion this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Adams, for your comprehensive remarks and for kind of setting the stage for the conversations that will continue. Our next speaker is our distinguished guest from Canberra, Ambassador Yamagami Shingo. He really needs no introduction. This is his second visit to this forum in Western Australia. He was appointed ambassador to Australia in December of 2020, so right in the middle of the pandemic. And despite that, has really made him, he's been in every part of the country that has made him welcome, where he could actually get in, and probably a few beyond that as well. The current foreign minister of Japan, Hayashi Yoshimasa, has been a friend of mine for some 30 years. I understand from him directly that Ambassador Yamagami has been told to slow down a bit because the embassy is running really, really ragged and tired trying to keep up with him so much. He's really been dynamic. He's been in the foreign ministry since 1984. Had distinguished diplomatic posts in Europe, in Asia, and throughout the United States, senior posts within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tokyo. But for our interests today, he also served as the acting Director General of the Japan Institute for International Affairs. And as someone who has a little bit of bias towards kind of the think tank policy community, perhaps that explains why Ambassador Yamagami has been so visionary and so forward-leaning. Because anybody who's been in Canberra for the last year and a half will tell you, Ambassador Yamagami is pushing the envelope. He's making us think about some of the big picture issues in the region. And so in that context, we couldn't ask for a better keynote speaker for this 5th Japan Symposium. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Yamagami Shingo.
Well, good morning, and thank you for your kind introduction, Gordon. And if I were told by Tokyo to slow down, but Canberra is telling me to keep up. In that regard, I take Canberra over Tokyo. Well, Her Excellency Ambassador John Adams, the Honorable Richard Cold, AC, Major General Natasha Fox, former Defense Minister Stephen Smith, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure to be back here in Perth after such a prolonged break. Thank you for finally letting me in. I tried on a number of occasions. It is often said that absence makes the heart grow fonder, in which case I have high hopes for the success of this presentation. During my first visit last year, I remarked on the incredible natural beauty and material wealth of Western Australia. And so when the opportunity came via an invitation from my friend Gordon, I moved heaven and earth to be able to enjoy such good company and breathtaking views out here in the West. Everything about WA is on the grand scale. The largest producer of gold in the world in September 2021, the world's largest iron ore mining center, a coastline of 12,895 kilometers, and a landmass greater than most nations. WA is always striving for greatness. Where else in the world would you find wines named after Plantagenet realms? And judging from weather reports, even Karratha is giving the sun a run for its money. WA has held a unique fascination for Japan, and that came long before our discovery of your lovable coconuts. From the earliest arrival of Japanese pearl divers to bloom, through to the major investment by Mitsui, Marubeni, Mitsubishi in WA iron ore during the 1960s, right up to today, and the involvement of MIMI and INPEX in LNG and soon to be explored green hydrogen exports. WA has drawn Japanese from Albany to Pilbara in search of material. This in turn has made WA a hotspot for Japanese visitors by reputation alone. Back in 2019, WA attracted a youthful bracket of Japanese tourists, most of whom were aged 20 to 34 years old. Moreover, 2 out of 3 of those visitors were on a return visit. You know that you are doing something right when you can attract that many young Japanese people to the pubs and clubs of Northbridge. And thus forever change the image of the Japanese as quiet and demure. It is often pointed out that Japan and WA share the same time zone, and unlike the states out east, there is no fiddling around with daylight saving time, which comes as a great relief. I did read that you had 4 referendums on daylight savings and a test run of it before removing it altogether in 2009. So at the very least, you are thorough in your examination of it. Itself a very Japanese trait. The fact that you face onto the Indian Ocean and that you are close in distance to the capitals of Asia than the cities out east continues to generate appeal in Japan as is one of your enduring strengths. Indeed, your proximity to our mutual Quad partner, India, is a major drawcard for Japan, as it allows us to work trilaterally with India on defense and national security. Furthermore, our continued mutual involvement in India, further developing its infrastructure while meeting its energy needs, and our advocacy for IORA assists in promoting India's regional role while simultaneously boosting its economy. The Indian Ocean is as much a key part of our security strategies as the Pacific. For decades, the shipping lanes of the Indian Ocean have provided Japan with myriad sources of sustainment and growth, and so their importance to us, as much to Australia, cannot be overstated. In recent years, however, we have witnessed the emergence of state actors who are not inclined to promote the vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, and who take it upon themselves to act unilaterally to force change in violation of international law based on their own opaque reasoning. The challenges that this presents could not be allowed to go unanswered, and certainly not in a region as dynamic as the Indo-Pacific. It was in recognition of this that the four democracies of Japan, Australia, India, and the United States combined our shared Indo-Pacific goals to embark on the Quad. From its inception as a concept first promoted by Japan, the Quad has grown into one of the leading multilateral dialogues in this region. Its remit is vast and continues to grow. From vaccine distribution to critical and emerging technologies, strategies for mitigating and tackling climate change, and from outer space to cyberspace, the Quad works together to ensure that the nations of the Indo-Pacific benefit from the rule of law, economic prosperity, and peace and stability. Our shared mission has become even more vital in light of recent events. Last month, I had the privilege of accompanying Foreign Minister Hayashi during his visit to Melbourne to attend the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting, expertly hosted for the first time by Foreign Minister Marie Spain. Foreign Minister Hayashi himself remarked upon how timely the meeting was, given that, in his words, the power of diplomacy is being called into question. The very fact that this meeting took place despite all of the obstacles presented by the COVID pandemic and competing parliamentary schedules speaks to the importance placed upon the Quad by its membership and how crucial its activities have become. As the Ambassador of Japan, I can also report that thanks to the kind consideration of our Australian hosts, the meeting took place on a public holiday in Japan, thereby allowing Foreign Minister Hayashi to attend. The Quad partners jointly declared our opposition to coercive economic policies and practices that run counter to the rules-based order, and we work collectively to foster global economic resilience against such actions. The four ministers have also welcomed the fact that the free and open Indo-Pacific vision has been resonating in various regions around the world, including ASEAN, the EU, and other European partners. It was in recognition of this that a senior Australian official approached me during the foreign ministers meeting, heartily expressing the view that Australia now very clearly understands that it is not alone. It is not alone. These words alone brought a smile to my face. As host of the Quad Leaders Summit in the first half of this year, Japan hopes we might have more reasons to work together as we move ahead. Furthermore, against the backdrop of the recent outrageous Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Quad leaders convened a virtual meeting this month and confirmed that such an attempt to unilaterally challenge the status quo by force must not happen in this Indo-Pacific region. This is further proof of our commitment to regional stability and prosperity. I can assure you that Japan stands with Ukraine. As proof of our commitment, Japan made the unprecedented move of providing non-lethal equipment to Ukraine, including bulletproof vests, tents, helmets, generators, medicine, and so on, with Australia providing its own lethal and non-lethal aid to Ukraine. Together, we have shown that we will act in defense of sovereignty and territorial integrity against those who would seek to infringe it by force and intimidation. This brings me to the main theme of today's symposium, a new era in Japan-Australia security cooperation. That cooperation, which has been steadily building over the decade, reached a new high point with the signing of the Reciprocal Access Agreement in January this year. As a long-term advocate for the agreement, you can imagine my excitement as I was invited to join the Australian delegation for the virtual summit meeting that took place in Parliament House and where I witnessed the signing of the agreement by our two prime ministers. Here I was, an ambassador of Japan, joining Team Australia in an unprecedented gesture to mark a milestone in our bilateral security relationship, and whose significance, in the words of Prime Minister Scott Morrison, cannot be understated. So there was important symbolism there, given that this is the first such agreement that Japan has made with any country. But what it also showed is that Japan and Australia are resolutely committed to this special strategic partnership, which is far, far more than mere symbolism. What the RAA does is significantly increase both the quantity and quality of the bilateral exercises that Japan and Australia conduct together. With a legal framework in place, this allows us to conduct far more complex and sophisticated joint exercises using more equipment and with a broader scope of scenarios. This in turn will greatly increase our interoperability and complements our existing defense arrangements with a mutual ally, the United States. What all this means is that in the years ahead, the various arms of the SDF will be paying call to the bases, ports, and training grounds in Australia in greater numbers and with more hardware. I hope this will also mean more SDF uniforms will be seen around the streets of WA, maybe enjoying a bottle of little creatures. Yet there is so much more on offer. Japan, like Australia, aims to become an independent space power. And we are currently engaged in strengthening the scientific, technical, and industrial foundation of our space activities to improve our space situational awareness, or SSA. Yet to make the most of our technology, we need a partner. And what better partner could there be than Australia, and Western Australia in particular? As we lie on the same longitude, our satellite information can be shared in real time. This also makes it easier to monitor space activity, as demonstrated by JAXA's use of the SSC space tracking station at Mingenew to monitor the Epsilon rocket number 5 last year. The Defense Technology Sharing Agreement that we have already allows us to cooperate on building capability in tandem. And I appreciate more development in this area as we move forward. This includes responding to the threat posed by ASAT, anti-satellite weaponry being developed by countries such as Russia and China. This is why Japan was so quick in vocally welcoming the formation of AUKUS. The adoption by Australia of nuclear submarines brings further areas of potential cooperation with the SDF into view, including joint exercises within the East China Sea or even Sea of Japan. Australia itself recognized the importance of this vital maritime area, a point reinforced by the Defense Minister's speech to the National Press Club last year, in which Minister Peter Dutton mentioned the Senkaku Islands for the first time in the context of China's threat to Taiwan and the regional order. This comment certainly caught the attention of Tokyo and was very warmly received. With the security situation growing more severe in our region and more broadly across the world, like-minded countries will act in unison to mitigate potential threats by promoting deterrence. What the past 2 years have also taught us is that national security and the economy are one and the same. Japan's and Australia's experience of the COVID pandemic and economic coercion demonstrate conclusively that national security and the economy are inseparable and must be treated as such. We are under no illusion that the road ahead will be challenging. So together with allies and partners, we are doing all within our power to ensure that the rule of law remains a fundamental part of our regional order. So this is where Japan and Australia are at present, on the cusp of a more dynamic, robust security relationship reinforced by decades of steadily built cooperation. What would have seemed inconceivable to generations past has become a reality through the dedication and commitment of Japanese and Australians determined to see this security cooperation succeed. If my speeches over the past year can be said to have a theme, it is how far we have come together. The fact that we are here today talking about the new era in Japan-Australia security cooperation is a fitting testament to the hard work done by many in this room who have pulled out all the stops to move this security relationship forward. We've advanced with all the dynamism of a Dennis Liddy in Swinger, and there are still many overs to go. So before I try your patience with any further sports metaphors, I will say that in Japan, Australia has a mate whose shared values and strategic interests will help ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains free and open. Together with our partners and allies, we are ready to kick this man out of the park. Thank you very much for listening.
Through much of my life, there was an operating assumption in public media, even in political discourse, that Japanese government officials and Japanese diplomats spoke in very subtle, inscrutable terms. You could never really understand what they mean. But it is testament not only to Ambassador Yamagami, that his remarks were so clear, so direct, but also to how far the relationship has come. Ambassador Yamagami's remarks actually characterized the changing nature of the Japan-Australia relationship. Our final speaker, before we go to a panel discussion, is the Deputy Chief of Army, Major General Natasha Fox, AMCSC. I think many of you will recognize how relevant it is, given the focus on security, that we have her here with us today. What you may not realize is that Major General Fox is actually the very model of the soldier scholar. She has deployed to Lebanon, to Syria, to Israel, was Chief of Staff of the Joint Task Force 663 in the Middle East. And on top of that, she has 3 different master's degrees. As a graduate of the Command and Staff College, the Defense and Strategic Studies course, she's gone a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in Singapore, the Wharton School, and the Said Business School of Oxford University. So it gives you a sense for the level of strategic thinking that we have in our defense force, which has led to the Reciprocal Access Agreement and this dramatic development of the Australia-Japan defense relationship. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Deputy Chief of Army, Major General Natasha Fox. Major General.
Thanks, Gordon, for those very kind words, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this 5th Annual Japan Symposium. I'm really quite privileged and honoured to do this when you consider the luminaries in this room. So Ambassador Yamagami, Ambassador Adams, former ambassadors, current excellencies, former defence ministers, business leaders, community members. Thank you for this opportunity. I would also like to acknowledge the Wajak Noongar people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for that really exceptional welcome today. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the leaders in this room who are employing veterans of our Australian Defence Force, supporting spouses and contributing to defence capability. Without you, we could not continue to serve and do what we do, so thank you. It's a great honour to be here speaking with you today, and in terms of the ambassadors speaking and the panel that's been constructed, it actually does go to show the great depth of the relationship that we have with Japan, and Ambassador Yamagami and Ambassador Adams have mentioned that today. So I'll try not to repeat some of their outstanding words. But from a defence perspective, Japan is a key and valued defence partner in the Indo-Pacific. The growing complexity in our security environment that Ambassador Adams referred to compels us to continue to mature our regional partnerships, and this is outlined in our Defence Strategic Update 2020. So it's in our policy construct. In this context, our partnership with Japan has never been stronger and continues to grow, and I'll outline some of the defence aspects of that shortly. We are committed to a very broad and very deep partnership with Japan, and as Ambassador Yamagami has mentioned, it is actually founded on our democratic values, our commitment to the rules-based global order, and our respective alliances with the United States. Changes in our region affect us all, and we recognise the value of partnerships to ensure our security, to ensure our prosperity. Partnerships are a tangible demonstration of our shared interests and the level and depth of our engagement. Of course, Australia is committed to our established partnerships. ASEAN remains key. Our alliance with the United States remains one of our most important defence relationships, cemented with the focus on the Indo-Pacific. The recent AUKUS agreement complements our established multilateral and bilateral partnerships. ASEAN, our Pacific family, our Five Eyes partners, the Five Power Defence Arrangement, and the diplomatic network of the Quad enable us to share our concerns, enable us to work cooperatively, collegiately, on many issues supporting us all. Open sea lanes for trade, for investment, for infrastructure, for solving the humanitarian challenges that continue to arise in our region, and of course climate change. Partnerships with like-minded countries contribute to our security and our prosperity, and that is why we invest in them. Now, with its growth in its prominence, but more importantly in its ambition, our partnership with Japan grows stronger, both bilaterally and multilaterally, through our competition with one another, but also through our multilateral partnerships that we have. As I've said, our partnership with Japan in particular has ambition. It is growing stronger. It is deep and enduring, bound by our values and interests, but grounded in our willingness to contribute to the region. It is open, it is inclusive in its character. More importantly, it is built on trust. Our nations have made immense progress, and it's this trust and depth of our relationship in the Special Strategic Partnership where it is expressed today. We have worked side by side with our Japanese colleagues in the Japanese Self-Defence Forces, in Samoa, in Iraq. We have also cooperated on many United Nations operations together, in our peacekeeping missions in East Timor, in Cambodia, and in South Sudan. Most significantly, in January this year, when Prime Ministers Morrison and Kishida signed the Reciprocal Access Agreement, it gave us more prominence and depth in that trust. We will leverage this agreement to enhance the scale and the complexity of our bilateral defence activities and increase, as Ambassador Yamagami said, the interoperability of our forces. The RAA was the first agreement in terms of regulating the status of visiting forces that Japan has signed since the 1960s. And this speaks to the strength and the mutual priority we place on this relationship, our long-standing friendship based on trust and respect, and our shared intention to enhance that interoperability and mutual capabilities. Our two countries actually already have very many bilateral, multilateral, large military exercise programs, and it's been growing at a significant pace. We have exercises right across the land, maritime and air domains, as well as trilateral and multilateral exercises with other defence partners. These exercises do improve our interoperability as they become more sophisticated over time. Some key advancements in particular last year included asset protection missions, amphibious landing activities from our LHD, and progress towards air-to-air refuelling. These exercises are reinforced as Australia and Japan continue to work together through international disaster relief activities, as recently demonstrated and mentioned by Ambassador Adams in terms of how we supported Tonga together. We hosted Japanese Self-Defence Forces aircraft and personnel at RAF Base Amberley, worked with the Queensland Government to manage those COVID requirements, and we also integrated liaison officers into our Joint Operations Headquarters to coordinate the disaster relief efforts. We have also commenced personnel exchanges with Japan, and for a first for Australia, we have actually, once this officer finishes a career course in Japan, will be posted to the Ground Component Command. This is a first for Australia. Japan also has people on our career courses. We also, for the first time, will have a Japanese officer posted into our 1st Division headquarters, and this goes to the people-to-people exchanges and trust that we can integrate military personnel into one another's headquarters. The RAA establishes streamlined processes to support this arrangement. It supports the deployment of forces into one another's countries, and it makes it more quicker and more efficient to do so. It will cover practical elements such as DIP clearances or diplomatic clearances, harbour and airport access charges, use of official assets such as vehicles, entry-exit arrangements of our forces, access to facilities, training, access to health and medical treatments, and local purchases in and around support exercises of material support arrangements and equipment. And these are just a few areas that the RAA will actually have in a tangible sense to support our interoperable arrangements. The effect is actually increased practical engagement, increased and enhanced interoperability through more abilities to train together, to exercise together, to work together in one another's headquarters and units to support that interoperable arrangements. And this will continue to strengthen our strategic alignment. The next step that's already been mentioned is the domestic ratification of both of our countries, by both of our countries, of the RAA. And we are already in that process in government, with it being tabled at the Joint Standing Committee on Treaties. Japan is also looking at it and working through that same arrangement. So in terms of the practicalities of the RAA, you cannot underestimate what it means for a military to be able to work closely with another military, to be posted into their headquarters, to be on training, to understand those arrangements, so that when we need to do it in a disaster relief circumstance or in another security situation, they're already tried and tested. You cannot do that if you don't have that trust and you don't have that understanding, and that's what we have with Japan. We value greatly the ability for our defence cooperation, and we look to the future, to the ambition of what the RAA offers us, with great optimism for what it will deliver. It is built on mutual trust. It is built on our shared values. And it is built to enable our people to continue to work together for the benefit of Japan, Australia, but more importantly for the security and prosperity of our region, which affects us all. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you, and it's been a great privilege, and I really look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Major General Fox. As much as I was talking about the stereotypical speech by a Japanese political leader or diplomat, what you don't realize is you've seen something quite remarkable here today. Other than RAA, the Reciprocal Access Agreement, which was the focus of the remarks, we just heard an extremely clear and focused 10, 15 minutes remarks without any acronyms, where we understood everything there. So it was remarkably well done, particularly befitting the soldier-scholar nexus that I referred to at the very beginning. Thank you so much. We now have about 35 minutes to segue into a panel discussion. So if I could ask the panelists to please join me up here on the stage. In addition to our three speakers that were here in the room with us, we're going to be joined by former Premier and former Ambassador to Japan, Richard Court, who needs no introduction here, and again by my colleague, Hayley Channer, who's our Senior Policy Fellow in Canberra. This is Hayley's first trip to visit us and her colleagues in the office since, I think, July when the Prime Minister was here. So we're delighted to have Hayley back with us again. So I'll kick off that conversation now, assuming the mic makes the transition. Look at that, seamless. Thank you to the folks at PAB. That's beautifully done. Again, we've only got about 30 minutes. I had more than any other program we've run in over 8 years. I think I had a greater number and higher quality questions submitted by those who are watching online, or those who pre-submitted questions from with their registration. So I want to start off with a couple of those to give you and the audience a chance to think. Then I've got two of my colleagues who will have microphones who I'll be able to come to get as many questions as I possibly can. Since we've just heard from the Major General and from Ambassador Yamagami, I want to start with initially Hayley and Richard with two questions, and I'll kind of open them up to the broader panel. And Hayley, I want to start with you. We had two questions. One from Bill Townsend. Bill is here in the room with us, but submitted in advance. But it's the same question that was given by Tanaka Nobuo, who's spoken virtually from this same stage before, former president of the International Energy Agency in Tokyo. And they're both asking the question about the relationship between AUKUS, something you've written on and done a lot of thinking on, and the RAA. So the broader question, I'll read it from Bill's things. What are the implications of AUKUS for Australia-Japan relations more broadly? And then if I could add it into the context of the Major General's remarks as well. So we'll start with you, Hayley, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Gordon, and it's such a delight to be here from Canberra. I was very lucky in that I got to work on the Australia-Japan relationship while with the Department of Defence. And previous to that, I actually worked in the Defence Minister's office. It was 2016, and at that time we were looking at different submarines. In fact, I was in the Minister's office when the submarine decision came down and was very disappointed that it didn't end up going to Japan. Not just because of the diplomatic fallout with our fantastic partner in Japan, but also because it was a really missed opportunity to do something with a very close strategic partner. Now, cast forward another 6 years and we're in a totally different situation with AUKUS. And I think what we're seeing is a different regional environment which has brought AUKUS into play, but it does open up opportunities for Australia-Japan relations. I don't think it's specifically on the submarine question. We've already been there with that. But instead, AUKUS is not just about nuclear-powered submarines. That was the big flashy headline, but in addition to that, there are so many other activities we will do under AUKUS for literally decades to come. So a couple of really important ones are the emerging technology ones, whether it's artificial intelligence, cyber cooperation, or undersea warfare, and also quantum. And we will work more closely with Japan, trilaterally with the United States and the UK, and we're also working with Japan on those technology issues under the Quad. And the final thing I'll say about that is what I find really fascinating about AUKUS from a Japan perspective is that Japan is not a member of the Five Eyes intelligence community. And that means that it's really cut out of a lot of really important intelligence discussions. AUKUS includes three partners of, three of the Five Eyes, Australia, UK, United States. If there was an angle for Japan to get more involved, I see more angles for closer cooperation with Japan on those key technology issues, and I hope we can kind of rectify some of the diplomatic fallout that we caused in our previous submarine decision with Japan.
So I want to open it up more broadly, but first I'd like to go to you, Richard. Obviously this is something that you're familiar with as well from your...
Yeah, look, thanks, Gordon. The beauty of AUKUS to me was that you can now mention the words nuclear power and don't get shouted down. And I think Australians, there was bipartisan support for that decision that was made. And I think the reality is, on the energy front, as we're wanting to move to lower carbon emissions, we're now going to have a more open debate in relation to nuclear. But I just want to make an observation, Gordon, which ties in with the negotiations for that reciprocal access agreement. We're now more than 2 years into this pandemic. And the downside of this pandemic has been we have not been able to travel. And we have not been able to travel freely overseas. And for the first year, we're able to live off Zoom conferences. And they work because we'd already built up that trust and respect and those personal relationships. But as the years have worn on, we've now got a major job ahead of us to refresh a lot of those personal relationships and to rebuild new relationships. Because what's happened over the last 2 years, a lot of personnel changes have occurred. Governments have changed, ministers change in different countries, corporate leaders have changed, and I'm very concerned that unless we move quickly now to refreshen, we're going to have some problems. I'll tell you the importance of trust and respect. The critical negotiations for that RAA were done at the height of a pandemic. And at the time, you had Prime Minister Morrison and Prime Minister Arbag at the time. And there was a stalemate. These negotiations have been going on for years, and big bureaucracies on each side and lawyers on each side. And as you know, there was a few pretty critical sort of stumbling blocks. But it was the personal relationship between two prime ministers where they were able to have an incredibly frank discussion, and Ambassador Yamagami knows what was taking place, a very frank discussion, and which they basically then said to their respective teams, you lock yourself in a room and don't come out until it's all done. And when you have that trust and respect at that personal level, you are able to achieve these matters. And I know from my current corporate experience, we're finding that getting back to having face-to-face meetings is cutting through, things are happening much quicker. And I'll just add to that, if you look at current Prime Minister Kishida, he was a long-serving foreign minister. He has terrific personal relationships with leaders right around the world. He sits down with the foreign minister in India, Jaishankar, and it's just and with Maurice Payne. It's just old friends coming together, talking. So I just don't want to underestimate the importance in the years ahead of us to refresh and rebuild those personal contacts, because at the end of the day, that's how the trust and respect can flow through to practical outcomes.
All the more happy we are to have visitors from Canberra. Ambassador Yamagami, you were in Canberra when the AUKUS agreement was announced, and as far as I know, Japan was the first non-AUKUS signatory country to come out and have a statement of any type in response to the deal, but very, very supportive. Would you kind of give us your insights as to what AUKUS means from a Japanese perspective?
Yes. And before I touch upon that subject, Gordon, let me expand on what was explained by Richard. And I think this signing of RAA owes a lot to the leadership by Prime Minister Scott Morrison. He kept on pushing at every juncture, and without his wise leadership, we could not have come this far. And also, I would like to highlight the importance, of efforts made by people like Richard. I clearly remember about 2 years ago, Richard came and visited Kaoru and me at my humble cottage in Karuizawa.
It is not humble.
I think that one of the main subjects of our discussion at my cottage was how to proceed on these tough negotiations about RAA. But Richard being Western Australia, I saw him at a bullet train station. He was carrying bottles of Western Australian wine. And certainly it smoothened our time, and we came up with some brilliant ideas. But yes, this is a historic agreement, seriously. And talking about the relationship between this kind of bilateral arrangement, RAA, or trilateral arrangement, AUKUS, or quadrilateral arrangement, I believe these multi-layered arrangements, frameworks are very, very instrumental in terms of beefing up our security efforts. And that brings me to your question of AUKUS. And yes, Japan was one of the first countries to express clear support for the creation of AUKUS. Why? Because we believe it is important to increase deterrence in the Pacific. The name of the game here is deterrence. We are witnessing a number of attempts by our partners to challenge the status quo by force and intimidation in order to prevent such moves from taking roots, and in order to preserve the rules-based international as well as regional order. We need to come up with strong deterrence. In that regard, AUKUS is very, very instrumental.
Well, thank you. Major General Fox, you did a wonderful job in explaining actually what RAA means and the implications of that. Could you step back and look at it from a slightly larger level in terms of how that might interrelate with the developments under AUKUS?
I think as I was talking, I was expressing what the ambassadors just referenced, and that is we have a layered approach to our bilateral, multilateral arrangements. And that is really key from a defence perspective because it gives us a range of different frames to operate in with different partners. And as I mentioned, you need us able to operate in that frames when you need us to. And hopefully that does not actually happen. But these arrangements and agreements and our partnerships are really key to enabling, from the practical perspective, the militaries to operate under the government's arrangements. So the bilats, multilats are really important in a framing sense. AUKUS is another arrangement for that to occur for us. It enables, as Hayley was saying, work on our futures technologies, not just nuclear submarines. There is much more to that framework that has potential. Our RAA with Japan and our partnership that we have in the trilateral sense with USA enables that to continue in that sense as well. So, and not putting words into the ambassadors, what he said, which is why Japan does also support us in that regional sense as well. It's just another frame for us to continue working together strategically in how we pursue prosperity and security in our region, how we work industry-wise to share technologies, but also then that translate into our defence operations and how we need to operate together.
It seems to me on a most simple level, it's the question of the how versus the what, right? You can say big picture, we want to work together. That's the what. The how is the RAA, right? The legal and logistical foundation upon which that collaboration continues. Thank you, very clear. I'd like to turn back to you, Richard, if I might, with kind of a WA-specific question. Nicole Fasana is the Western Australia Trade Commissioner, Trade and Investment Commissioner in Northeast Asia, but based in Tokyo. And for our audience here in WA, she asked the question, what are the implications of the FAA, in particular for West Australia? Is there a, if you put your Premier's hat back on, plus your Ambassador's hat back on, plus our man in Tokyo's hat back on, can you both, I would add, maybe expand that a little bit, both AUKUS and the FAA, if we're looking at it as we are today here in Perth, What are the implications for WA?
Well, first of all, I want to say that the representation that Western Australia now has in Japan is excellent, working closely with the embassy, and it's long overdue. We hear a lot about the Indo-Pacific region, and I think what we're starting to see now is a stronger recognition that the Indo side of it, the Indian Ocean side of it's pretty important. And there's a strong, already there's a significant defence capability in Western Australia, but when you look at the resource wealth that comes out of here and the importance of those supply chains of commodities into countries like Japan and Korea, I think we're going to have to see an even stronger focus on building the defence capabilities on this side of the country, and particularly up the top in the north. I mean, you look at the huge investments in the Pilbara, both in minerals and in energy, but increasingly in the Kimberley region, which is very remote. I was watching that rescue operation the other day of the Indian fishermen in the Ashmore Reef, and it makes you realise the huge distances involved. I mean, it's pretty hard getting choppers out to INPEX's operations, yet alone to be, carrying out defence operations out in that Indian Ocean. So I think what we're going to see, and this is one of the beauties of the Quad, we're now starting to see more cooperation with India, and India is expanding its sort of reach closer to Southeast Asia, and I think those developments are important. But from an Australian perspective, I think there's more that we need to do here. Western Australian industry, I think, will be able to benefit from what a very significant expenditures, government expenditures. 2% of our GDP is it's a lot of money. And I think it's important that we build up those capabilities. And finally, it's interesting because of the long distances involved in Western Australia, we are used to pioneering and innovating to handle, communications across long distances, but also in airlines. I mean, what's not understood is the first commercial air route in Australia was in Western Australia, interestingly between Geraldton and Derby. And the reason it was between Geraldton and not Perth is that the railways had a monopoly up to Geraldton, so that's pre-regulation. But I think we're going to see a lot of developments in communications, on the space side of things, which interestingly our resource sector is right into, because they become leaders in running operations autonomously. So it's all good news.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to kind of address kind of the big topic of the day. For almost 5 years, every single event we ran at the Perth US Asia Centre inevitably would turn to a certain very colourful US politician. And the last 6 months has been relatively quiet on that front. But today, we really can't have a conversation, even if it is about Australia security cooperation, without talking about the events in Ukraine. They've dominated international attention, and many of the questions we got. We had a question from Professor Tadashi Kimiya, who's watching from the University of Tokyo. We're delighted to have those of you in Japan watching this discussion as well. And like so many of the other questions, they wanted to know the implications of what's happening in Ukraine today for Australia-Japan security cooperation. We got a very clear indication from Ambassador Yamagami's remarks. I might want to start off with some other reactions to that as well, because you've addressed it in your speech. Hayden, maybe we'll start with you, and then I'll come back to the other members of the panel to see what you think about how this changing international context. But again, if I could preamble this just a little bit, we're less than a month into this crisis right now, and yet the consensus is there was more change in European security strategy over the course of a weekend than there had been in the previous 50 years, right? And the question is, does that pace of change then have a lag time and get reflected in this region as well? So Haley, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I was really shocked, like everyone else, naturally, about the events in Ukraine. It seemed to just happen overnight, in the blink of an eye. And you just can't turn the news on today without seeing really bad news. If it's not the pandemic or horrific scenes from Afghanistan and the withdrawal of US troops there, it's a war in Europe. And I think, if bad news comes in threes, hopefully we've really put that aside now and we can start to focus on what good things will come for us in the future. But Ukraine has done a number of things for our Indo-Pacific region. Really, it's scared and shocked us into a new realisation that the era of conventional wars is over. And we are now facing a much darker, frankly, future position. And I know that Japan has had a trajectory of increasing its defence spending and also increasing its contribution to regional peace and security since after the Second World War. But it has taken a very long time to get Japan to where it is today because of Japan's pacifist constitution. And if Ukraine has done anything, it has really scared the Japanese government and Japanese public into realising how visceral and real war can be. And for the Australian, Japanese, US context, there's a lot of discussion over Taiwan. And could this situation, the same situation, play out here in our region, and how horrific and scary would that be? And in a sense, that has really catalysed all of us into much quicker action. We need to work together to do more quickly things. What I think is also important to note is that if you look at Japan's territory, it has an island, its westernmost island, is only about 100 kilometres from Taiwan. Now, if you put that in context here in Perth, it's the same distance from Perth to York, or as my research director jokes, it's still Perth and 100 kilometres. But that is such a short distance that if there was any kind of contingency on the island of Taiwan, Japan would be probably immediately involved. And in fact, changes to Japan's self-defence force law now basically necessitates that the United States and Japanese forces both would be drawn into a war in Taiwan. Now, what does that mean for Australia and Australia's contribution? As horrible as it is to think about that kind of future, unfortunately, that is where we are now. We can't just hide under a rock and believe that conventional wars are a thing of the past, now that there are other things like grey zone warfare. Ukraine has really reminded us that hot wars can still happen, and it will be very important now for Australia to work much more closely with Japan, not just under the RAA, but in every aspect of our relationship with Japan, so that we have a partner that can help us with trade coercion, that can help us with non-traditional security challenges like climate change and how that's putting other countries in our region under pressure. So really, while the Ukraine crisis has been a terrible occurrence, it is a catalyst for closer cooperation between our two countries.
Major General Fox, I do recognize this is a sensitive area for public commentary, but it's been pretty clear from your remarks in the panel that the RAA is a remarkable achievement, but it took a long time. And it took political leadership, and it took some dedicated work. If you look ahead, are there areas where we should hope for an acceleration in Japan, Australia, security cooperation, based on kind of the trends that we see in Ukraine, et cetera?
So the Ukraine war showed us that sovereignty matters. The Ukraine war showed us that things can change extraordinarily quickly, that there is no substantial warning time in order to prepare to protect sovereignty. So from my perspective, the RAA is quite timely for us because it enables us to have that framework that supports our operations now. So that's why it's so critical.
Thank you. We were fortunate in August of 2020, then Defence Minister Linda Reynolds publicly launched the 2020 Defence Strategic Update from this stage. And one of the underlying kind of conclusions of that update was that the strategic warning time has evaporated. And I think you're exactly right. We've seen that driven home very clearly in the last month. Richard, over to you.
Yeah, Gordon, just a comment in relation to energy security. We've all seen the reaction of Germany. It's found itself in a very difficult situation where it's wound down coal, it's wound down nuclear, and an increasing dependence on Russian gas. And sort of overnight, it realises it's got itself into a difficult position. It's interesting when you look at Japan's sort of energy mix. Japan diversifies where it gets its energy from. And it gets LNG from a number of different countries, including Russia. It's got the Sakhalin fields next door to it, which is logical for them. It's a neighbour. But it's also got the Arctic LNG coming around the top, those two new developments there. But because it has diversified its sources, countries like Australia will be able to step up and help sort of fill any shortfalls. But I think from a position of energy security, Australia, like many countries, we're moving to we want to lower our carbon emissions. But in the process of doing that, we've also got to make sure that we ensure that we have our energy security as well. So I think that's one of the lessons that's come out of it. The other interesting thing is the supplies of fertilisers and the like coming out of both Russia and Ukraine. I think we need to become more self-sufficient in producing more of our own fertilisers that we are using for our agricultural sectors, and I declare a vested interest. I'm involved in building a new fertiliser project.
Master Yamagami.
Well, if I may, my personal take, as a student of, international relations and diplomatic history is, at the end of Cold War, we are talking about the end of history. My take is, looking at what's been transpiring in Ukraine, I think we would be able to say post-Cold War ambiguities are clearly behind us. It's not that we didn't do our best. G7 was expanded to G8 at one time. Entry into WTO was granted. But that said, after all these years, we are now clearly seeing who are standing on the other side of the river from us, blatantly challenging the rules-based international order. This brings us to the need for us to join forces in order to protect the rule of law between countries like Australia and Japan. And as Richard rightly pointed out, the stable supply of energy is also important in order to surmount these hurdles. So there is a lot Australia and Japan can do together.
Fantastic. We've got about 10 minutes left. I've got two colleagues who have microphones, which will be wiped down hygienically between each question if we want. I'm going to ask you to ask short, pithy questions, just brief it and answer. We'll start with former Defense Minister Stephen Smith. We've got a microphone coming to you right there real quick.
Until the panel started, there wasn't much mention of the trilateral relationship that Australia and Japan have with the United States. We're both allies of the United States, and for some time we've had a ministerial level foreign ministers trilateral process, and more recently a defence ministers level trilateral process. It seems to me two things. Firstly, that the obvious place to go to pick up all of the new technology prospects that we find mentioned in AUKUS is our own trilateral with the United States. That's first point. Second point, our focus has been security, but you can't have security without prosperity. And one of the things which has been vital to both of us has essentially been the presence of the United States in the Indo-Pacific. One of the weaknesses in terms of that US presence is we still do not have a comprehensive US economic engagement in the Indo-Pacific, courtesy of their lack of presence in the TPP. And so the Biden administration has made it clear that it's not proposing to join the TPP, so we have the perversity that India is not in APEC or RCEP and the United States is not in the TPP. Maybe it's time that we start to think about US economic engagement being as important as our security engagement. And perhaps one vehicle of doing that is for Australia and Japan to suggest to the United States that it's time we had a ministerial level trilateral meeting on the economic front, which included our treasurers, or finance ministers as other country calls them, and our trade ministers, to start to encourage the United States to genuinely and deeply economically integrate into the architecture of our region.
Fantastic. Professor Smith, has given voice to two of the questions that came online that I really wanted to get to. Tom Corbin from our sister center at the University of Sydney is watching online and asked specifically about that trilateral Australia, Japan, US relationship, whether it should be reinvigorated in this context. And then Glenn Fukushima, who's watching from Washington, D.C., again, focused the economic aspects of security. And so we'll start with you, Ambassador Yamagami. Can I give you a reaction to those?
I think that's a very good point, made by, Mr. Stephen Smith, and I couldn't agree more with, tenet of his argument. On a lighter note, the other day I went to this, Toyota factory in Altona, Melbourne. And I asked them, where are those Toyota cars running in the streets of Australia produced? Some are produced in Japan, others are produced in Thailand, and others are produced even in the United States. But in terms of covering, the supply chain of Toyota cars to be marketed in Australia, US, Australia, or Thailand, Australia, we are yet to extend the network of CPTPP. So this is one of those examples. If only we have a sort of comprehensive framework to cover trade and investment throughout Indo-Pacific, this would very much help business activities as well and strategic meaning too, very important. So yes, we should join forces together to bring United States, back to, CPTPP. It's not that, US is not interested in this endeavor. They are coming up with, ideas of economic framework, throughout the Indo-Pacific, but nothing is going to alter it, nothing is going to be an alternative for this important strategic framework of CPTPP. And both Australia and Japan can be proud of the past achievement, but yet there is a lot, we can do together.
I'm going to try to squeeze in another question. Do we have any more questions from the audience? You ready? Yes, up here. Ambassador O'Shaughnessy. And it's coming around here.
Thanks very much, all of you, in fact, for fascinating presentations. I had a question and a comment for Ambassador Yamagami. I was really struck by the power of your messaging on the Indo-Pacific and the importance of stability there, and its resonance with the absolutely in lockstep messaging of your counterpart in Mauritius. And I really want to commend Japan for the unity of purpose in that consistent messaging. I think that's a very powerful force in the region. I was interested in your perspectives on how unified can we get the region to be on having unified public messaging on the importance of that stability. We have players in the region that are more comfortable with talking about that than others. So any insights you have on the importance of building a unity of purpose in public messaging would be really interesting to hear. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the excellent point, Ambassador. And I'd like to just share my personal thought with you on 2 points. One, this important concept of free and open Indo-Pacific. I think this is public goods. Any country can join, this important concept. And in order to entice our friends in Southeast Asia or Pacific Island countries or throughout Indo-Pacific region as a whole, we need to keep on coming with tangible benefits. In that regard, we are working hard on such issues as vaccine distribution or improving quality infrastructure. And the second point I'd like to mention here is the way we address the challenges facing these countries. It should not come from the attitude of lecturing or teaching. It should come from the perspective of extending helping friends as equal partners. I think equal partnership is a key word. Throughout Japanese history, we learned bitter lessons during Second World War time or even during 1970s. Unless you are careful, you will face tremendous, resistance or reluctance, on their part, and looking at how authoritarian regimes are behaving throughout the region, we shouldn't lower ourselves, to that standard, and we should come up with more sophisticated and more passionate, approach. And there, I think Australia and Japan can share our experiences and come up with a better approach.
I realize there are many more questions in the audience, and I have 2 pages of questions I'd love to get to, and I can't tell you how much I want this conversation to continue. However, this is a Japan symposium, and since our partner in this endeavor is a country that gives an apology when a train is 30 seconds late, if I don't keep in time, then I'm in trouble in the process. But it really is wonderful for us to have Ambassador Jan Adams joining us virtually, to have Ambassador Yamagami making his trip in. We're so delighted to have you back. To have our local team here with Ambassador Court and Professor Smith, and really the strong support of the Defense Force. To have the Deputy Chief of Army join us, it really gives you an indication of how quickly this relationship is developing, how important it is. So on behalf of the Perth US Asia Center, let me first express my thanks to all of our speakers, our panelists. Let me express my thanks to my amazing team. For the last 2 weeks, we have actually not been in the office because we wanted continuity of programming. If we all met in a conference room together, we couldn't be here today. I want to express my thanks to my colleague Haley, who kind of led this Japan Symposium endeavor. We're delighted to have her here with Tokyo. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. We look forward to reconvening again for our 6th Japan Symposium next year. So thank you. Appreciate it.